Hi there and welcome to Code Framer. So in the last video we understood about all the design principles that we have. So the solid design principles. So we saw the definition of all those solid design principles one by one. And also we had a look at what will basically happen if you do not follow those design principles. And after understanding that, we also saw that what are the advantages of using design principles or following the design principles. So from this video, we will start understanding each and every design principle one by one. And also we will have a look at the example so that we are able to clearly understand what a particular design principle means. As part of this video, we will start with single responsibility principle, which is also known as separation of concerns. So let's first of all recall what single responsibility principle means. So whenever you are creating a class, then the first thing that you must do is to first of all ensure or establish the exact responsibility that particular class is going to hold. That is something very important, because if the responsibility is not clear, then you won't be able to clearly define what exactly your class is going to do. So once you have established the responsibility of the class, then you must always ensure that you are not adding too many features into that class which is not relevant to the responsibility of that class. So say for example, as part of your application development, you have 10 features. Now you notice that only 2 of the features are basically relevant to a particular class. Then in that case, do not dump other features into that class. So what you can do is you can create a separate class to basically implement remaining features. But if 2 of the features are relevant to the responsibility of a specific class, then define the methods which is relevant to those 2 features alone inside the class, which must be relevant to the responsibility of the class. So having understood this, now let us take an example where you have a requirement of creating an application which basically stores the list of tasks that you want to perform. So as part of creating this application, you can store many different data. Like for example, you can store the title of your task, you can store the description of your task, you can store the start date, the end date, the duration of the task. You can also store the status of the task, whether a particular task is completed or not. So there are different information that you can basically store in order to create this application. But our focus is understanding the design pattern, right? So we won't go into the details of this application. So for this example, we will just go ahead and store the task title along with the count of that particular task. So our application should be able to basically track the number of tasks that we are going to perform, right? So in order to do that, we will create a class, right? So the first and the foremost thing that we have to do is to establish the responsibility of this particular class, right? So the responsibility of this particular class that we are going to create will be that it should be able to take the task as an input from the user, and it should be able to store that particular task in the memory along with the count of that particular task. So if the user continues to add more and more tasks, then our application should be able to track the number of tasks that has been added by the user. So these are the 2 parameters that we are going to store as part of this particular application. So this is the responsibility using which we are going to create our class. And of course, the user should be able to add a task into the application. So that is also one of the responsibility. So now let us create a class, and we can give it a name as my task, or we can say my tasks. And now we can define the constructor of this particular class. So we can write def init, and then we can pass self as the argument. And inside this, we will have to first of all define the instance variables that we are going to require, right? So first we will create a dictionary which will basically store all the tasks. So we can write self.tasks and we can create an empty dictionary. And also we have to track the number of tasks that we have added, right? So we can create another instance variable and we can name it number, and initially the value will be 0. So this will be the constructor of our class. So now let us define the method using which the user can add task into this particular application. So we can write def add task, and we can take self as the argument and also the task that we have to basically add. So that we can take as an input. So first of all, since the user has invoked this particular task, it clearly means that a new task is about to get added in this particular application. So we will first increment our number variable. So we can say self.number and we can increment it by 1. Now we have to add this particular task along with the number into our dictionary, right? Because that is where we are going to store all our tasks. So here we will take the task number as the key and the task itself or the task title itself as the value. So we can say self.tasks. Inside that we can pass self.number, which will be our key, and this will be equal to the task that we have received as an input to this method. So I hope that this particular method is making sense. So basically, after writing this particular method, we have actually achieved the responsibility that we wanted this particular class to handle, right? Which is to take the task from the user as an input, and it should be able to store it along with the number of tasks. So apart from this particular method, we will also implement one more method which will basically help us to clearly see or read our dictionary. So we will implement a string method. So we can say def str underscore underscore, and we can take self as the argument, and then we can just return a string value which will simply give us the dictionary in the string format. So now we have completed coding our class. So now let us see first of all how it is working. So first let us create an instance of this class. So we can say t is equal to my task, and now we can invoke the add task method in order to add a particular task. So we can say t dot add task, and we can write a task. Say for example, I want to code. So this will be our first task, and let us add one more task where we can say for example, I want to jump. So these are the two tasks that we want to perform today. So now if we print t dot tasks, let us see what we get. So if we execute this particular code, then as you can see here that we are getting this output where the first task is I want to code and the second task is I want to jump. So basically our application works. Now say for example, you had one more feature to implement where you have to basically store this particular content inside a file in your local system. In that case, what would you do? Now since you have clearly defined the responsibility of this particular class initially, now this is something, an extra feature that you have to add, right? And this feature, if you think about it, it is not really relevant to the responsibility that this particular class is holding. But just for the sake of example, let us just implement that particular method of saving this dictionary into a file inside this class itself, so that we can understand that how basically we are breaching single responsibility principle. So we can write def, and let us name this method as save to file, and we can take the input as the file name from the user, and then we can write with open, and then we can write the file name, and we can open this particular file name in write mode. So we can write w, and we can call our file object as f, so that we can access this particular file object. So we can now write f dot write, and inside that we can simply pass our self.task dictionary in the string format. So we can simply write self.task. So this basically implements the save to file method inside the class. Now let us try to use this particular method and see if it is storing the task information into the file or not. So here we can simply call this method save to file, and let us say our file name will be task list.txt. So now if we execute this code, then as you can see here that we have a new file created here, which is tasklist.txt, and inside that you can see that our task is basically written. So which means that our application works and it is able to store the list of tasks inside a file into our local system. So now let us go back to the code. Now everything is fine and our application is working fine. There is no issue. But just think about another situation. What if I give you another requirement where you have to create one more application or a separate class which will store different books that you want to read? In that case, again, you will create a new class which will basically store the list of books that you want to read. So you will name it my books, and similarly you will create instance variables as self.books, which will be an empty dictionary, and again the self.number will be 0, and you will basically implement the same method add book, where you will take the book title as the input, and then you will increment the number of books, and also you will store that particular book title into the book dictionary. So you will basically implement the same feature for the book class as well. But if I give you a requirement where you have to store the list of books into a file, then again you will have to implement the same method which you have created inside the myTask class into the book class as well, which means not only you are breaching the single responsibility principle, but also you are breaching the dry principle. And this is the main disadvantage of basically breaking the single responsibility principle. And this is exactly what will happen, and this is the exact situation that you will be in if you breach the single responsibility principle. If you dump too many features which is irrelevant to the responsibility of the class, then in future if you want to use the same feature or implement the same feature in another class, then basically you will have to duplicate the code and write the same feature into another class as well. And this is the main reason why you should always define the responsibility of the class and stick to that responsibility. when it comes to implementing different features, right? So in order to solve this, what we can do is we can create a separate class. So we can move this particular method save to file into a separate class. So we can write class, and let us name this particular class as save to file. And let us declare this particular method as a static method, because this is like a utility, right? This is a feature which can be used by many different classes across your application, right? Because you are simply taking a content and you are writing that into a file, which seems like a functionality which can be used by many different classes. So you can define it as a utility class where we can simply move this method into a static method. And then here we will change the arguments that we have. So first argument will be the file name, and the second argument will be the list of tasks itself, right? And here, instead of self.tasks, we can simply write the string format of the task dictionary. So now if you execute this particular code, I hope that I have written everything well. Yes, now let us change this. So since save to file has been moved to another class, we need to call it separately. So let us create a new instance for this save to file class. And now we can invoke the save to file method where we will pass the file name. So we will say new task list.txt, and we will also pass the task dictionary that we want to print, which means t.tasks will be passed here. So if you remember, this is the dictionary from the my task class where we are storing all the list of tasks. So now if we execute this particular code, then as you can see that a new file has been created. If you go inside, you can see that again, it is also storing the list of tasks in a file. So which means that this particular approach of writing a separate class for a functionality which is not really relevant to our main class is a better way of implementing this particular application, right? Because now if I ask you to create a separate class for books, like reading books, or how many different movies you want to watch, or whatever you want to do and whatever you want to store. For example, you are writing a diary, you are writing a journal, or whatever. So if I ask you to create different classes for different purposes, for all those classes, because you have defined responsibility of each class specifically, and you have basically implemented your code or methods which is relevant to that responsibility, you will be able to use this save to file class in order to save those contents into the file name separately without basically implementing the same method save to file in all your classes. This is the main benefit of following single responsibility principle. So I hope that this video really helped you to understand what is single responsibility principle and how basically you should code or write your class in order to follow this design principle. So always remember, whenever you are writing your class, establish the responsibility that that particular class is going to hold. And if you are getting a new requirement to implement a feature, or if you have many different features to implement, then implement those features in such a way that the responsibilities of your classes are defined, that those features are implemented in different classes based on the responsibility that those classes are holding. So I hope that now single responsibility principle must be absolutely clear to you. So if you have any doubts or questions related to this particular concept, then do post those questions into the comment section. I will definitely answer those questions. And in the next video, we will understand about the open close principle. So having said that, I hope you enjoyed this video. So if you like this video, then hit the like button, share it with other code lovers, and also subscribe to Code Framer for more videos. Thank you and see you next time.